Hi, it's Heather, and I'm so glad you're here. We've renamed our podcast Health, Harmony, and Heather to reflect my passion for enriching our perspectives on life by exploring social phenomena, the human condition, and our abilities to connect with ourselves, each other, and the planet. We'll talk about all forms of health, from the physical, mental, and spiritual, and we'll hear from experts that take us closer to living harmoniously. We will explore all things that lead us to our innermost truth, happiness, and freedom. Join me and take the ride. Kelly Wiekers is a psychologist and best-selling author. Distinguished as one of Europe's leading psychology experts, she's a regular spokesperson in both the international media and an expert on panel topics of both mental health and authenticity. Crowned Miss Holland in 2011, Kelly first enjoyed a successful career as a top model. When at the peak of her career, she stunned an industry when she decided to leave it. A pivotal decision that stemmed from her experience with the negative side of modeling, and through it, she found her calling for psychology, her passion, and for sure, her authentic self. Her third and latest book, Choosing Me, is a go-to guide to living authentically. And with over 300,000 copies already sold to date, Kelly is here and present to help us harness authenticity in our lives and in our businesses. Welcome, Kelly. Thanks for being here with us all the way from Ibiza.
What a lovely intro. Thank you so much.
Oh, it's really exciting to have you here and really talk about, your journey. Obviously, coming out of the fashion industry myself for, 30 years, and watching it change and evolve, and especially in places it needs to, has been refreshing. So let's just start from the beginning. Give us your story. Tell us about the modeling. Tell us about when the shift happened, and we'll just jump off from there.
Well, I think I was always interested in psychology. It is my true passion. I remember myself being like a 10-year-old. I was always observing people. I was always highly curious of what motivated people to do what they did. And I always read psychology books, quantum mechanics, spirituality. It all interested me. And I think that's the route I took. After high school, I started studying psychology, but also I was scouted as a model. And I think that's where the career path began, of everyone telling me how exciting and amazing it was to be a model and to live that life and to travel and to have photo shoots. And for me, myself, I just got really excited about studying psychology. And that's what I was truly passionate about. But I think there and then I didn't know as much about myself as I do now. And that's why I also help people pivot their lives, careers, whatever, because I fell into the trap of chasing someone else's goals. I think I wanted to try modeling full time at some point after my bachelor's degree, because everyone was telling me, this is something you need to do. This is a dream job. So I entered full-time the modeling industry. I did Miss Netherlands, Miss Universe, and then it was still Donald Trump's competition. So way back. Yes. And although it gave me great life experience, it also made me really, really insecure and actually just unhappy, because I was doing something that didn't fill my cup, and everyone was telling me how exciting it was, but it wasn't to me. Right. So that's something I think where our stories aligned, that I eventually, after a few years, decided to fully quit modeling and fully focus on having my own practice and really doing what I love most.
So was it equally your own desire to really follow what your heart was, equal in tandem with how you were feeling about modeling, your weight, listen, I've been to so many go-sees. For those of you guys listening, a model go-see is when a model comes into a room, there's often a table of, certainly multiple people, usually more than one. They come into the room and they have to, they are literally being sized up and down and all around. And the model hands the book into this table of people, and they usually don't say much. Sometimes, I mean, I was always very warm and friendly, but it was also a learned behavior. I had to, because what I walked into was a way of how it worked. Like that's how it was. And then, so I was sitting at the table cold and cool and collected, kind of like everybody else. And then I realized, like, I guess the feminine side of me, the empathetic side of me was like, wait a minute, this is a human being, so I started, and I think probably a wise person in the industry also, stepped in front of me and did that, and so I always had such a high regard for not only the work of a model, because it looks very easy for those of you who have never sat behind a camera and were the specimen of the day. And it's hard work, but it's also there's a wall where you become inhuman almost to the people that you're working for. The poking, the prodding, the tugging, the pulling, the move over here, the move over there. And, models do have to, and they didn't have a voice for a long time, really learn to speak up for themselves. Like, hey, wait, you can't just pull and tug at me. If you speak to me, I can move over here, whatever it may be. I just wanted to touch a little bit on that. And one of the reasons why, to be honest, is because back then it was the modeling agency, modeling world. It was the covers of magazines. It was, that was the kind of Me Too. Like we were flipping through magazines. Now it's on social media. Now it's on TikTok. Now it's on Instagram, and it's everywhere. And so I just wanted to talk about that a little. Like, you knew you could be stronger once you learned psychology. Like, put that together for us.
Definitely. I think you're spot on. Just people that want to relate to the modeling job, I think we can all relate to having a job interview. That sucks mostly. Everyone is just really anxious and you're like, I want to do my best and I hope I get this job. This is what models do 10 times a day. And then they're in line, like back in the day, 20 years ago, I was in line in Milan or wherever with 600 girls for one lousy job that didn't make a lot of money, but everyone wanted a job. So you were just there. And as you say, like there was this whole tendency of you walking in, not being greeted, looked down upon almost, like flip through your book, and just someone telling you your face isn't good enough or your weight is, do you eat that much? People would actually tell that to your face. So it was like really tough. So every day you would get, if you would go to 10 places, chances were high you would get like 10 no's because there were just so many people. And I can remember already being into this for like maybe 1.5 years full time. And then I was in Milan for this job for like a really big fashion house, the biggest of the world. And there was this table, exactly as you explained. People were sitting there and they were just like, okay, come up to me, you get your like trousers, put it on and come back. And I remember getting in that fitting room and I just couldn't close the button because it was a freaking child's size. I mean, 20 years ago, everyone was so unbelievably skinny. I just couldn't get in that. So I was like, do you maybe have something else? And then you already have that feeling of, oh my gosh.
They're not going to have me now. Right.
So then I walked out and this woman looked at me and she said, what size do you have? And I was really skinny.
Yes.
So I was like, she was like almost appalled of my looks. And if I now look back on my pictures, it was like, I feel sad for that girl,
Right. Yes.
So I just walked out feeling so bad about myself. And then I remember walking into the streets of Milan and thinking to myself, I must be crazy, exposing myself to this every day, like I'm some kind of lowlife, like nothing. I'm just going to quit. I actually quit mentally right there on the spot and told myself, I will get back to that fashion house and I will be there in whatever size I want to wear in my pants. And I will like come back as a businesswoman because this is not for me. And I think that is definitely what was then, and I'm not even talking about like the shoots and how it went down backstage. And I mean, Me Too, it's real. I mean, it happens, and I can be happy that it didn't happen to me, because I think I was lucky that I was smart enough. I had the background of a solid family behind me. But I've seen girls, they came from Russia, Moldavia. They had nothing. They are there to support their families, and they have no choice than
Right.
to do whatever they need to do.
Yeah, because I want to just point out like how brave it is. You know, we hear oftentimes like the power of no, but to be okay, so like all of those lines right now Kelly makes it, right? She's in the creme de la creme, right? She's at the top of the game. Like maybe, you know, she's the first one that gets called in. She's starting to get call-ins and she's at the top of her game and she's done that hard work and she's made it through that difficult time, right? Now she says, I got here and I don't want to be here. You know, this is not what I want to do. This is not authentic to me. And that's why I think it's very exciting and important to mention, and I mentioned it into the intro, that you're an expert on psychology, but you're also an expert on authenticity. So what you did in that moment as a young girl is you actually listened to your true authentic self. And fear, when something is so real, you guys, you got to know that you go for it, because fear disappears when you know something to be true. It's not like there's no fear, but like she said in her mind, she knew right away it was over, right? Then she has to say, okay, now how am I going to do it, right? When she thought in that moment it's over, she was not afraid. The fear came after, okay, now that I've made this decision, how do I handle this decision? How do I play it forward, this decision, right?
And I think this is definitely something that women have in them, but we mute it through our lives because we want to be that amazing daughter, you know, a great mom, a great friend. But so we mute our intuition and our inner voice. But once our inner voice tells us it's over, it's done, we're moving on, you're moving on. I mean, it's happening.
Yes, it's happening. And a lot of times we don't listen to it, or we naysay it, or we put it down. And we self-talk ourselves into doubtful self-talk. Like, no, that would never work. You know, when your inner tells you,
your inner voice, your inner voice is like a friend, you know, if you never listen to your friend, she stops talking to you. She's like, okay, I'll just like leave it.
You are my best friend right now after this book. I mean, I'm jumping ahead for a hot second just because when you said that, literally, you guys, you can open any page in this book. I can literally open this book and just start reading. I'm just going to randomly read. I'm just opening the middle of the book and I'm just going to start reading. So how do we get from that critical voice to a loving one? I just said that. Okay, that's the universe. I just talked about how critical we are to ourselves because that's the fear creeping in. Here's this one. Whether you like it or not, your life is going to change, both in ways you welcome and in ways you would never choose. Okay, I'm going to open another page. Okay.
I love this.
I mean, a fun way to think about your future without the limitations of patterns, fears, doubts, or obstacles is to do the miracle thought exercise. Okay, so you can tell I'm randomly reading from the book. So she's going to tell us about the miracle thought exercise now on this podcast because I brought it up. But she says when we're looking for a solution to a problem, we tend to focus on the problem in front of us. Why something will or won't work. I just said that, right? That's when the fear comes in. Okay. So I'm going to put the book back down for 1 second, but I just want to talk about your gravity because you listened to the voice in your head and you said enough. Then what'd you do? How did it happen from there? Tell us how you got there.
I think what the best advice is, what worked for me and still works for me. I think when we make decisions in our life or we want to get to a certain goal, like I want out, I want to quit, I want to go back. We only look at the top of the Mount Everest and then we say, oh, but it's so far. It takes so many steps. It won't work. But actually, the only thing you need to do is make the decision. So you made the decision of what you want to do. And then you just look at your feet and you just see if you can see the first step. And that's the step you take. And I think eventually the path will reveal itself for you. You don't have to know all these steps. You just take the first step and you'll get there. And I think that's still for me and for clients I speak to is the most important thing. Big changes will happen in your life, and you don't have to know exactly how you get to that next point. It's just walking through that door and new doors will unveil itself.
100%. I love the analogy. I always say that when I climb mountains, because I do a lot of mountain climbing. Yeah. And, I mean, if I look and I've climbed Kilimanjaro, and I've been at 20,000 feet in Nepal looking at Mount Everest. Crazy. And if I thought about the top of that journey without looking at my feet, like you say, and taking that first step, I would have never, ever summited. And that summit was about each and every step. And you don't run up mountains like that. Altitude is like a killer. You got to be, it's slow. They say pole pole in Africa, Kilimanjaro, pole pole. You know what that means? Slowly, slowly. So yes, one foot in front of the other. And you know what else that's a metaphor for? Is living in the moment. Right? Definitely. Not looking too forward. It's good to have goals. It's good to have lessons behind us. All of the mistakes we've made, all those wonderful lessons that we've gathered. And it's good to have goals and look ahead. But the most important thing is the here and now.
Yeah.
Definitely. And how do we get people to understand that living in the moment is really forward motion?
Definitely. Because
talk about that a little bit.
Everything is ever changing. And I think it also relates to courage that you just spoke about. I mean, we are always so trapped in, I cannot do that, or it takes courage, and I don't know if I have it in me. But if you just stop for a moment and look back on your life, and how many times did you tell yourself, don't know if I'm able to do this, I think I can't, well, you did it all. I mean, you handled it. You found a way. So stop with this negative bullshit, because you're just blocking yourself. You can do it. You did it. And you're still doing it. And you will do it till your last breath.
Yes, exactly. I have one of my dear friends, his name is Adam, and he's been on the podcast before. And he talks about, Adam Glassman is his name. He talks about manifesting. And, Adam is a very successful man in the fashion industry. He works for Oprah. He's been her creative director for years and years. And he'll tell you he manifested all of it. He worked at it through his own mind. He envisioned it. And when I had a podcast with him like 3 or 4 years ago now, I remember the first one on manifesting. And I think sometimes we don't recognize, like we don't listen, we don't see what's before us. And I recognized during that podcast that I had too manifested just about everything in my life, like right down to my kids. All I thought about was having a boy first and a girl second. God willing, I got 2 healthy children in the end.
First I have to see it and then I'll believe it. No, first you have to believe it and then you'll see it. So you saw it before your eyes, like it already happened, and that's why it happened. And I think this is also with the people that I also coach, and which you always read in the magazines, like people that end up working with people like Oprah, or what we think is like gold medalists or whatever. They already envision it, because like the highest form of manifestation is utter delusion. People would say it's delusion, but it's actually just, I think, maybe you look in the future, you're just already seeing what's going on.
I'm very floaty right now with imagining the children that I got.
Yeah, but if you make it very practical, if you always tell yourself you can't do things, or you don't have the looks for X or Y or Z, that is what you will manifest, because that's what you think. Your thoughts influence your emotions, and your emotions influence your behavior. So you are 100% responsible for whatever you're manifesting into your life, and not because it's spiritual only, because it's just practical. It's psychology. It's like what we think, that is what we create in the world. So I think very practical. It's about, if you say you can't do something or you can, you're right. You're 100% right. So
that's right. I love when psychologists and psychiatrists break down the brain in the scientific way for me, and then they put it into a very practical reasoning. Like, for example, a cornfield, and how the brain and the muscle of the brain, that if you keep the negative thoughts, you build a cornrow, so to speak. And there's like a gully, and you get stuck in the gully where the water, you know how like a garden is designed so that the water can, rain and it won't flood the garden. Well, those gullies, those water traps, for a farmer, I envision those about our brain. And that if I keep thinking negative thoughts, I'm making that gully, and then water and all that stuff gets trapped in there. And now I'm buried at the bottom of this gully, and I got to try to swim to the top of all the negativity to get out of it, just to see the sun, to see the corn growing, to see the beauty, when it's already there at the top, right? So if I start to say, no, that's not negative, that's positive, and change the perspective, shift the perspective, in essence, I'm actually changing that chemistry in my brain. I'm changing those cornrows so that that's a row of positivity. And so the water that gets trapped in that you're swimming in is delightful and wonderful. And so how do we teach people about perspective in everyday life, and how that sounds real easy to do right now when we're talking, yeah, the cornrow, I get it. But then your son is giving you shit right before your podcast is about to start, and the cornrow is nowhere in my mind, and I'm falling back on old behaviors, and so how do you work at that, Doc? Well, what do you do?
I think, that's a great example, because I use something similar in my book. I always talk about like the river bedding, and if you have a river, it just flows, the water takes that like route to go through the mountains or whatever, because that's just the pattern. And if we want to learn new behavior, be it thinking more positively or more gratitude or just changing our triggers or whatever, at first it will take time, because you're actually digging out, like carving out a new route for the water to take. So it takes time for it to really like get bigger and wider, and for the water to like really flow there, and like exactly, and for the other river to dry out. And I think the most important thing, if you say like in everyday life you get triggered, the problem is we always live on automatic pilot. So we get a trigger and we do, like our son walks in and we act. And I think the best thing you can do for yourself is learn to go from automatic pilot to authentic pilot. So just stop yourself for 2 seconds instead of responding right away, or actually I have to say react, because it's an automatic reaction. If you take that 2 seconds, 5 seconds, then you can respond. So instead of doing what you always did, like being again in that river, you say, okay, how do I want to handle this? And I think that's the way to break patterns, because patterns can only be broken if you acknowledge that they are there, and you stop yourself and you choose a different route, you choose a new path. So don't
react. You pause.
Exactly. Pause.
Like you catch
the best reaction is a pause.
Yeah. I guess if anything, you practice, right? Like riding a bike, you practice it, right? You get on the bike, you fall off. What do? You pick back up the bike. There's a step you have to take. You got to pick back up the bike, get back on the bike, right? So when we're changing our behaviors, we have to take the steps. We have to probably mess up. Like, by the way, I totally messed up with Jax and yelled at him. And then I was like, you know what? Me yelling at him is just going to antagonize him more. Like if I don't react to him because he's trying to antagonize me, because that's what teenage boys do.
Of course.
You know what I mean? Like, so it's like, there's a book I read. It's always called, I read it over and over again. It's called Don't Bite the Hook.
Oh, that's good.
Don't bite the hook. Yeah, it's Petra Chowdhury. I didn't want to say her name wrong, but her last name is Chowdhury. She's I'll find out more about it, but don't bite the hook, and just look it up. It's on Audible. It's a great reference resource book that I listen to over and over again on Audible. But yeah, don't bite the hook. And then, okay, so now let's like pivot a little bit, because this is psychology too, right? So if authentically, it's my authentic self to be angry, right? Like I want to talk about anger a little bit, just because we're on the subject about it. And I want to talk about anger, and I want to talk about authenticity. And and I want to talk about it together. Right now, we're in a place in the world where there's so much going on, and there's so much fear, and there's so much anxiety, and there's so much uncertainty, and there's so much change, as you said, is always going to happen. But there's a lot of anger. I can speak for our country, America. Maybe Ibiza is a little more peaceful right now, but there's a lot of anger. And I think that authentic anger is something that we should practice. Like, we shouldn't be like, right? So like, it's not bad to be angry, and it's not even bad to show your emotion. It's actually good to get it out and good to show it, but it's harnessing it. It's how you communicate it. It's how you control it.
I think that's the only thing, because we are over the toxic positivity. We are over like everything, but be grateful for what you have. Yes, but sometimes it's just practical. It's a practical thing. You get your trigger and you get annoyed, frustrated, angry, sad, whatever. But it's also healthy.
Yes.
Emotions need to get out of your system, and they tell you something. But I do think that when something triggers an emotion with you, the interesting thing is to look for the trigger behind the trigger. So you don't get annoyed because your son interrupts you. You probably get annoyed because then you don't feel respected or
That's
whatever.
it.
There's something else that's the trigger behind the trigger. And I think that's really important to think about. Okay, if I'm always angry, people walking around angry, what does that anger tell you? Instead of just latching out to everyone, it doesn't solve anything. Think about the trigger behind the trigger. Why am I so bothered? Why am I so angry? And I think if we find a solution for that problem, we'll feel a lot less angry. And we still feel anger once every while because it's healthy, but not that much.
I love that, because I think that there's something in that where how are you communicating your anger, right? We don't just to go off, all angry and punching people. And, that's not a that's not a society that we can live in. But to harness your anger in a way that you can, understand it. I love that you said that. What's the trigger behind the trigger? So yeah, I wasn't mad that Jax was interrupting. I honestly had plenty of time. He was disrespecting my space and my time that I had asked for. And I think when I'm mostly angry and I think about it, it's that I'm not being heard. It's that I'm hurting. I'm not really angry. I'm in pain, right? Isn't a lot of anger pain?
Pain of not being heard, of not feeling valued, of someone not seeing your worth. So it's all, worth is such an important theme for so many people. Am I worth it to be listened to, or to respect my time, or whatever? There's so many reasons why you would feel angry about it. And I think that's the whole thing with emotions. Luckily, in the past years, people are much more into self-development and looking, okay, what's behind this? But we still have a really hard time communicating with others about it. So we have a hard time communicating to our kids what's going on, to our friends, to our spouse. So I think that's where also the challenge lies. It's one thing understanding yourself and really getting to the root of the problem, but it's also how do you explain that then to your kid? Like for me, I'm an introvert. So for me, as an introvert, I recharge my battery with alone time. But having two daughters that are 4 and 7-year-olds, it's summer holiday. We're also in reconstructing our finca here on Ibiza. There's people around all the time. I feel like my bucket just going up and up. And what I learned, instead of latching out and being super annoyed, I just explained to them, look, mommy needs her alone time to just recharge. And I understand that you want to be with me, but then sit here on the couch with me. We read a book, we get some quiet time in, because that's my way of it's not being social all the time. And I think that's also the thing, like understanding yourself is one, but you interact with your environment. So let them in on these thoughts and what you need and how you feel respected and valued. And people can join you in this.
Yeah, I love that. And if you get out in front of the anger, maybe it doesn't show up as much. Like if you start to understand it, then you start to understand yourself and what the anger really is. It's fear, it's not being seen or heard. And then you can start to change the way you communicate, with people. And then because I know with anger, everybody knows with anger, there's no good solution at the end of it. Nobody's listening. There's no positivity in it. So I love that. Take the pause.
Emotions are just a signal. They are telling you something. What are they here to tell you?
Yes, I love that. Let's talk about so to be authentically yourself, right? To stay true to yourself, to live the life you want. You were living a life with a huge crowd cheering you on. A huge crowd telling you that's the path you should be going on. That's the way you should walk. And you turned around and said, no, crowd, I'm going to go this way. That people think is selfish. I bet your agent did. Right? So, people think, and I'm glad to see that shifting. I think that's in a way, a little bit of an old way of thinking, especially when it came to women, know what I mean? It became unselfish to speak out for ourselves and choose what we want. But
of course, we're raised like that. Always care about others. Just what are you doing? It's not important. Be friendly, be nice, help those people. It's just ingrained in us.
Yeah, ingrained in us. So talk about why it isn't selfish. Why is it crucial to choose yourself?
I mean, that's always the thing. People always think it's so selfish choosing yourself, but I always ask them, okay, let's say you have kids or you have a relationship. If you always think about the other first and you get out of your way to do everything for them, like being a mom, always catering to their every question and whatever they want, and you just drain yourself, what do you get? Anger, sadness, overwhelm, stress. How do you act? Not as the best version of yourself. So I always say, is it selfish to spend some time with you on things that fill your cup and give you energy, and then go out into the world, to your family, to your co-workers, whatever, and then have this access of energy and just happiness because you feel good. So it's actually only caring about others is selfish, because end of the day, most people end up with a burnout because they're just going after what everyone else wants instead of what they want. So it's so important to come back to you. And of course, life can get busy and there are things that need to be done. But at the end of the day, you have to ask yourself, what do I need? Yes. And what do I want? And not forget about that.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's so important. I would say, we talked a lot about the home, but I guess in the business world, that would be considered burnout, right? Where you're taking on too much at your job. So whether it's at home, we're talking about the kids and all that stuff and raising them, but let's kind of move that into the workplace a little bit, and how stress and burnout can play a huge role on the mental health of a business person, and how saying no and creating those boundaries and friendships, within the office where someone has your back and says like, no, I'm not coming in today. It's like, no, and you shouldn't, instead of like, oh, really? Like, well, I mean, that used to be like, one of the good things that came out of the pandemic, it's like, if you're sick, stay home, around America, for sure. The work ethic is so crazy based on how the country was built that you're a loser if you're not working really, like busting your ass, 3-6 jobs, whatever the heck it is. That was the American way. You know what I mean? You worked hard and hard work would pay off, and then people started to say, hey, wait a minute, I'm working hard and I can barely make ends meet. Right. So I think that there's an understanding that like, you got to be
more to life than just
more to life. Yeah. And if you think that someone else is your ticket, you're twisted, because one of the things that you said that was interesting to me is catering to other people all the time is selfish. And I believe that to be true, because oftentimes people that do that, they're actually getting self-fulfillment from those people and doing those things. It's giving them purpose, when in fact they should be out finding their own purpose. so that they can then feel good and grow and lend to the world. The other thing that I wanted to mention that you talked about was when you're angry or when you're burned out, I believe as citizens of a society, we have a responsibility to show up and give good energy to the world. You know, even if you're angry, you can still give good energy in a good, healthy debate. It's when we show up with all the pain and all that baggage, those invisible, idiosyncrasies around us that come from our childhood or our traumas in life. So talk a little bit about, how to set boundaries and with people and how to walk that path to your own happiness when you're not so concerned about the opinions and proving yourself to others. Like if you don't go to work because you're sick, who cares what the other guy thinks of you? But we get caught up in that. Talk a little bit about it.
I think the basics, when we get back to burnout, the good thing is that mostly what I see, you don't get burned out because you work too hard. It's mostly because you did too little of what actually aligns with who you truly are. So if you have to work hard, but it's your own business or your family, and it just gives you so much joy, I wouldn't say you won't get exhausted at some point and you need to rest, because everyone needs to rest. It's mostly an energy leak. So it's mostly burnout is continuously putting your efforts and energy in something that actually isn't giving you anything back. So people that in the workplace get burned out, they mostly say, well, it was already for months that I was in this negative situation with my boss or coworkers, or I was so stressed. I didn't get any energy from my day-to-day business. So that's why I burned out. And I think that's so crucial that we talked about automatic pilot and authentic pilot. We live on automatic pilot so insanely well, I would almost say, that we do this day in, day out without stopping ourselves and asking ourselves, why am I so freaking stressed? Why am I so tired? We just continue on until we burn out. And I think it is really something that mostly builds up. And what I see with my clients, then mostly it already built up over time in our job because it didn't fulfill us. And then something happens. So we have something extra, like a divorce, or we lose someone or whatever. And then it's just too much. So I think just bottom line, we should start way earlier thinking about like the big areas in our life, which is, I think, work, because most of us spend lots of time of our week working. Then we have our relationships, and then we have ourselves. Luckily, that's also now a big thing for most people. And we think about, okay, how do I spend my time in these areas, with whom? And is that how I want to do it? Or is there maybe something I'm working towards? Because I also hear from people, yes, but not everyone can just choose whatever job they want to do. No, I've also worked jobs that I didn't like, but I always knew it was a step towards something that I would enjoy. So if you know where you're going, also in relationships, you can have that relationship with a friend that you're like, this isn't giving me the right energy right now, but this is something temporary. That's okay. That's life. That's normal. Sometimes we have a little more and a little less. But when something gets structural, you have to make choices and decide to stop committing your time to that person, or looking out for a new job, or set boundaries with family members, because otherwise, I mean, eventually that anger, that sadness, that stress, it comes from somewhere. So something is going on in your life that isn't aligning with how you would want it to be.
100%. The trigger behind the trigger.
Yeah, definitely. Everything happens for a reason. I do believe that our default mode, and that's what we also see in science, okay, our default mode is not extreme happiness. Our default mode is like just a balance. I'm okay, because that's like from our history, our evolution, the most important way to live, because then we still find like the need to go out to meet someone and find a partner and like create babies and go out for food, because otherwise we would just be very lazy if we just hang around like, oh, life is perfect. You wouldn't do anything anymore. But on the other hand, if you're just always down, stressed, negative, there is an energy leak because you should be quite okay with whatever circumstance you're in.
Yeah, it's so true. I think that oftentimes I also have regret, like that's the other thing. It's just like oftentimes if I bite the hook with my kids, and by the way, everybody listening, the rule that nothing stays the same. So, what worked for me as a kid and what my parents told me, if I say that to my kids, they look at me like I've got three hats. Like, have you been on TikTok? Like, you can't say that anymore. So, I think that setting boundaries, like with an understanding of where everybody's coming from, like my teenagers, like I had a struggle, like all parents do, and one of my struggles was because I didn't have the knowledge. Like I like to be told, I like to have a little bit of a lens into the future, right? And people always talk about raising teenagers, and there's no handbook to parenting, of course, but they don't really talk about, I don't think we talk about it enough at all, because I didn't know about it. I should have known about it. Like that separation that happens. And when teenagers are developing, and that separation in order for them to actually become adults and be independent and things like that, and what that looks like. And I think we need to share. We'll have a separate podcast on raising teenagers.
Exactly.
Right. But I'm going to use it as an example because I felt like shit a lot about myself because like I thought I did something right. And then I found out, 5 years later that, it was the wrong thing. Or my kids told me, well, when you did that, that really sucked. And I'm like, what? You know what I mean? And I just regret like that I messed up,
But I think we set the bar high. We set the bar high because we now know more, so we think we should do it all and know how to do it. But I think if you do something with love and really with good intent, it's also on them. I'm like that with my kids. Like it's on you to later on, if you feel something went wrong, to fix it or tell me, because I'm always open to communicating about it, but it's also your life and your way. Yes. And if you will have kids, I'll hope you do the best job, because we also have to have some forgiveness. It's also like when I look back at how my parents raised me, I think they did an amazing job, but it was also, of course, they did things quote unquote wrong, but it wasn't
or that
wrong.
You maybe would have made a different decision and it was a different time.
Another generation. They didn't know any better. And now we feel because we know better, there's this abundance of information that we have to have it all right. And I think like the best thing that we learn growing up is in the dynamics of a family, in conflict, in like that rubbing against each other and seeing what goes, because that's real life. They will have that with their friends and their co-workers. So that's something they have to get used to. Yeah. And I think, as you were saying, like what I think lots of people find hard is when you feel that separation with your teenager. I have a stepdaughter that is already 19 years old. She's been in my life for the past 13 years. And I think it's also a good thing that they want to do it differently and they want to separate from you, because I think the biggest trauma that we all have from the previous generation is that it's something in psychology we call conditions of worth. So when we are born, we like instinctively, we are like in need for survival. So we always look at our parents to help us, to get access to food, to get comfort, to get love and everything. And as we grow up, we just learn to always please our parents because they are the main providers of everything we need to survive. But that is something, if you want to become who you authentically are, at some point that has to turn, because now we have these adults that are 40 years old and they're still looking at their like 70-year-old parent and only doing what they want them to do, never dare to go after the career that they wanted or choose the love of their life because it wouldn't like meet the requirements of the parents. And that's sad. So at some point, these teenagers, they will tell you, no, that's not what I want to do, or I want to do this. And actually, it's a good thing. You want them to stand up for themselves, to be right, or do you want to be happy? And I think at some point with your kids also, you have to be like, okay, I hope I did my job well. I hope they know I will love them unconditionally. Of course, if they will ask me what I think of it, I will tell them, like, because that is my opinion, but just go do.
Yes.
And make your own choices. And if you fall flat on your face, that's the best lesson, because everything is a win in the end, because it takes you to where you need to be. Yeah. And I think so many relationships would be so much better if people would just let people be, let them. And of course, I mean, for everything is an age. This can't happen when they're 11 and they're like, okay, I'm off, bye. Yes. But it's true. It's what you talk about. It's also with adults. It's just the unwillingness to accept change in their lives. It's like a whole chapter in my book. It's just change is such an integrated part of life, but still we always say, I can't let go. Yes. But there is no choice in it because it is happening. Yeah. You have to let go because it's not there anymore. You're holding on to things that are not there. And that's why you feel sadness. And that's why you feel stressed. And that's why you feel that anger. Because if you just let it go, it will find a way. Yeah. So, but that is a hard part of life, of course.
Well, listen, I could keep you on this podcast for another hour and a day, but I just want to get back into your book for just a second, because what an incredible, I really, really enjoyed it. I want to say thank you so much for sending it. You guys, it's such an easy read, and it is literally staying true to yourself and living the life you want. And here's another page. There's no one size fits all. Focus on your happiness, whatever that looks like to you. And so this has been on my bedside table since Kelly sent it to me. And I really recommend it. It's just really practical. It's I love the size. I just love, it's like mine's already bent and moved, and it's just so wonderful. And I just want to talk just real quick about, this is your third book. So your first book, your debut book, was Happy Life 365. And that was really teaching the art of a joyous mindset. So that book was about mindset. So if you guys want to look at some of Kelly's past work, her debut book, Happy Life 365. The second book that launched back in 2022, and that was The Power of Choice. And we're talking about that now. But this was a personal memoir that you organically blended with expert advice, right, to empower your readers in their personal choices. Why choosing me? Why was this the evolution for you as the third book?
And for me, it felt like my first book, Happy Life 365, was really about what we talked about earlier. Like, how does your mindset work? How do you change your mindset? So how do you change your thoughts? Because if you change your thoughts, you will change your emotions and you will change your behavior. So that was like a solid book that is, again, a really easy read, but it was like in depth about, okay, I have anxious thoughts, or I have burnout. I want to get rid of it. How do I do it? Yeah. And then the second book, because people always told me, like, I want to know how you did it. How do you handle toxic friendships? How do you handle separation, like a love that didn't work out? How did you handle becoming a mother? So I thought, okay, like the red thread through my whole life is the power of choice. I just had this feeling always that no matter what comes my way, I can maybe not choose what comes my way, but I can always choose how to handle it. So I was like, I want to write a book that just explains how I did that and the questions I asked myself to keep choosing for my own happiness. And people loved that, but then they said, I now know how you do it. You inspired me and it was so relatable. But now, who am I? How do I choose myself? And how do I get to that authentic version of myself? And that was choosing me. So that's the last book. And I really feel like that 3-step plan of know yourself, be yourself, choose yourself is so important, because that's the basics of everyone that comes into my office and says, I don't feel that good. They either say, I don't know who I am. how do I find out? Or they say, I know damn well who I am. I just don't dare to live my life that way. So how do you be yourself and actually choose yourself in everything that you do? Because mostly we get to this point when our life is already established. So we have that career, we have certain friends, we have a relationship, and then we feel like, ooh, I want to change, but how do I do it? So that's like the practical guide to actually get to your core and really feel, okay, at the end of the read, I just want you to feel, hallelujah, I finally found who I am or what I need to do to just be happy. And of course have shitty days because it's life, but I mean generally feel I'm where I belong.
I love this. I'm going to read one more thing. Every day you should intentionally be curious about yourself. And that is just a beautiful, beautiful thing. And there's a whole nother paragraph that goes along with it, but I just keep pulling random things out because I loved putting in the opening, mental health and psychology along with authenticity, because the truth of the matter is, folks, if you're not authentic to who you are, you're going to go crazy.
That's the thing. You will never be happy living someone else's dream, living up to the beliefs of your parents or their wants and needs. They need to chase their dreams. And if they didn't do it, now it's your turn, your life. You need to do what makes you happy. And I do feel that everyone that tells me, or I see it online, who's influenced, they're like, I have anxiety, or I have stress, or I feel depressed. There's a trigger behind the trigger. What is it? Apparently, you're not living your authentic life. Find out what it is and start living it, and you'll feel a lot better.
Love it. Use the example of Jax. I'm not mad that he came in here. I can handle it. I got plenty of time. I was mad that he was disrespecting my space. And then how do I react to that? Knowing he's a teenager, and where am I going to go with it? And it's just like, that's a tiny little, capsule of what you can swallow kind of, each and every day in your life.
And if you want to live a more authentic life, start tomorrow by pressing pause. And before you do something, before you react, try to respond and think, okay, what do I really want? What do I need?
Pole, slowly.
Exactly.
Slowly. I love it. Listen, tell us where everybody can find Kelly Wiekers, your Instagram, your website. Your book is Choosing Me. I know you tell us where we can buy it. I know you're self-published, which I also accolades to you on that. Beautifully done. 300,000 copies and more to come. I got mine. You better go get yours. Give it to us, Kel.
You can find me mostly on Instagram. I still love Instagram. So that's Kelly_Wiekers. You can buy my books anywhere you can find books. So Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Waterstones, get it where you want. Also on Audible, of course, if you want to listen to it. And my website, kellywiekers.com. You can find me everywhere.
And it's spelled just like it sounds, Weekers, Kelly Wiekers. I couldn't have had a more beautiful day with you. Thank you so much for your time, and keep doing what you're doing, because we got to keep choosing us first, because then what's that oxygen mask? Put it on first. Then you can help the rest of the plane.
Thank you so much for having me on.
Appreciate it. Cheers.
Thanks for being here today. My true hope is that each podcast gives you some new perspective, new information, or connection into living that brings you closer to your freedom. And I can't wait to meet you here again for more practice next week.